Andrew, thanks for sitting down and joining us and having a chat, I suppose, giving a bit of an update to everybody. I want to start off just by kind of asking you how the last month, I suppose, has been. It's been turbulent, I suppose, but from your perspective, how have you found it?
Last month would be just before Christmas, I think, wouldn't it? So obviously lots of games in that period on the pitch. Obviously lots of changes in personnel. It's been very intense in that period. So as we know, Wayne and other staff left, and we've had an overhaul in that regard. And at the same time, we've had to play football. So it's been very busy. Obviously the transfer window has come upon us as well. I think, let's be honest, the position in the league means that, there's pressures on that as well. I think we have to think about both now but also the future. So I think I would describe this last month as being one of being very intense, lots of change, but hopefully I think lots of great change for the future.
Okay, let's start with maybe, I suppose, the biggest change, and that was the head coach. So tell us a bit about that. The discussions, I suppose, with Wayne and the decision for him to leave, and then we'll get to the replacement in a moment. But take us back there, I suppose.
Yeah. So I think first of all, I thought Wayne did a really good job in so many aspects of the football club. Particularly the culture, very much very engaging. The supporters, I think most supporters would say that as well. And he was great to have around the club. Ultimately, though, obviously we've got to look at results. We all know that we've got a budget which is not competing with those at the top of the league, but I think we had expected to be a little bit better than, somewhat better than where we were. And we weren't, and I think he was plagued by injuries, let's be fair, to some key players over that period of time. And I think we did see some shoots of performances. So I remember the game, although we lost at Sheffield United, that the performances had started to turn, we thought, but then I think unfortunately, we had a repeat of earlier things where, Norwich as an example. So when that came about with Coventry, Oxford, I think we had to really say, are we going in the right direction? And we thought that we ought to make a change. So that was the principal reason for doing that. I think you have plenty of opportunity here. I think that, as I say, very difficult in the circumstances with the injuries, but I think we thought we needed to make a change.
And then obviously making that change is not just, one person leaving, it's bringing someone else in. So again, how was that process in finding a new head coach and ultimately finding Miron Muslic?
Well, I think, in any senior position, let's say outside of football, we all know that if you're recruiting somebody in a very senior position, you'd have a load of time. You'd be thinking, well, they've got 3 months notice period and we need that position quickly, but we need to get the right person. With football, obviously you need to go at, warp factor 10 to try and get the right appointment and in a very short space of time. And immediately that you've kind of said, departed with the other manager, then the clock's ticking to get somebody in. But you've got to get the right person, and you've got to make sure that at the same time, there's both a focus on what can we do to improve things in the short term, but the long term, they've got to have the right personality, they've got to have the right credentials in terms of playing football, all sorts of things. So everything you've got to do very quickly. As with all positions outside of football, I think you would also think about, if you've got a senior position, what's your succession planning? So what we do is we try and have a succession plan for any eventuality. Now that's something that I think we've learned over the last couple of years, whether it be somebody leaving you because they see it, they've got a better opportunity, or as in this case, making a departure, then we need to have a plan. Now, that has to be very fluid, because obviously you might have a list of style of managers that you want, style of football, credentials that they want, that you may want, and you've got to have that at all times. Those people, those managers, they may move to other jobs, so it's got to be very fluid. But we had quite a long list, so as soon as we actually made the decision once we made that decision, then we went to that long list. It then becomes a process of, do people want to come? Is it actually possible? They may be on significant wages somewhere else. There may be get-out clauses which would prevent us from being able to get that manager. And in some cases, they may not want to come to Argyle. So you have to do all that screening before that, and then you get down to those, let's say, 15 or 20 people that you might be looking at, and they all shapes and sizes. People will say you should have an experienced championship manager. Some would say you need somebody who's up and coming that's going to grow into the role, and we have a balance of all of those. But what we do want is the right type of football that we want to play, exciting football. We want the right type of person that's going to fit in with the ethos of the club and who's going to gel everybody. So those become then the other things. Then you have a bit of variety, but those are the core principles. And we go from that long list to then screening them. So we do video interviews, and then finally down to final interviews, which is essentially 3 people in this case, and the board make the decision to appoint. So that's the kind of process, and even in me describing that, you can see it's quite a long process, but that is done pretty much within 10 days. So it's very intense, and we also look at obviously their references as well. Have they worked, what type of personality they are. So you've got to do a lot to get from A to B.
Yeah, absolutely. So having gone through all of that, why was Miran Muslic the one that came out on top?
We felt he was the right person for Argyle at this present time. So if you look at from a football perspective, he'd been in a situation with a club that was struggling in their league, and over a period of time he'd managed to get them through towards the top end of that league. So from a football perspective, absolutely tick that box. With not the biggest budget in the league that he was in. Exciting football, which I mentioned, which was something that was very key. Very much a collaborator, somebody who works with people. He's got a really strong ethos, bonding with people, very engaging as well. I think we've already seen that. He's very clear in what he wants as well. So I think that combination from hitting the ground running, and then also what you might want from long term. He's got vision. He wants to be very successful. He knows where we're at in terms of where the club is positioned, but where it wants to go to, the vision he bought into. So I think those were very compelling, in terms of what we wanted. And I think we've also few learnings. Let's face it, there are learnings from previous appointments. There's no football club in the country who doesn't go through, a straight trajectory of going from this to that. So you're going to get bumps in the road. So what we have to do is look at as well, what are the things that are core principles that we need, but also the things, perhaps pitfalls that we can avoid in the future, or where there might be more risk. It might not necessarily mean you made the wrong decision. You might have made the wrong decision in the end, but at the time you thought it was the right one. But what are the learnings from that? So obviously we reviewed those things as well. And so there isn't a foolproof answer to everything, but what you can say is, having gone through that process, gone through that very detailed way of doing things, spoken to the person themselves, seen what they've done, you are giving yourself the best justification for that person being in the role for the future.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to pick up on a couple of things you mentioned there. You mentioned the word risk, which some people have labelled disappointment in being. We'll come to that in a moment, but the other one is learning. So what are the main things that you think have been learned from, and let's take the last 2 appointments, which wouldn't have lasted as long as you would have wanted, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very difficult to talk about specific individuals because you're then getting into lots of different aspects. So I'll kind of answer the question in a couple of ways, really. So I think first of all, when Stephen Schumacher left, we had again quite a very difficult time period to make things happen, and again, we looked at a variety of different people, and in this case, we looked at coaches from abroad, coaches with experience, and perhaps coaches coming into their first appointments. And you'll understand when I mentioned availability is one of those big things as well. So when we looked at, for example, championship experience at that time, that wasn't necessarily visible, or certainly not visible for the type of football that we wanted to play. There were coaches that were available. What we therefore we went down a real coaching route. And I think in that respect, the coaching aspect, I don't think you could knock in terms of what the individual was doing for player development, etc. But I think the cultural aspect of managing a club and a club atmosphere, I don't think it needs to be championship, but I do think it needs to be somebody's that day in, day out, intense, worked in, transfers, worked in player development. I think that cultural aspect was one thing that became more obvious as being a key credential for us in that next appointment. I think we also learnt from again, going back to what you've got available in the summer period, I think we also went with a situation where that cultural aspect that perhaps we needed to reinforce in the appointment perhaps went too far the other way. Again, I mentioned lots of the things that worked really well, but I think also that we didn't necessarily have all the core backroom team that we needed to help and support in that. So I think testament to Wayne, I mean, he really wanted to trust the people that are around him. I think there's a great thing to have, and I think you should have that. So the likes of Nance, etc., should always be a part of a club. But I think you've got to balance that as well. And I think from a coaching perspective, getting that right is really important. So it's not just the lead person, it's everybody around you. So I think, it's easy to be, this is all hindsight stuff, but I think the most important thing is you've got to face into things and you've got to say, when we did review that, what could we get better? What are our learnings? Let's not pretend that everything went the way we wanted it to go, and what can we do to make it right for the future? And so I think if you talk about backroom team, which I know you'll come on to, if you look at cultural aspects, which I've mentioned, and you look at the footballing aspect, then I think those 3 things we feel we've ticked off this time.
Yeah, okay. Is this one still a risk, though?
There's a risk in any appointment. If you have a risk in appointing a new CEO or for an organisation, there's risk. So let's not you can't say it's going to absolutely 100% work. But what you can do is you can say, given what I do know and what we've seen, what is the best chances of getting us to achieve our ambitions? And we feel at this moment that Miron is the best person to do that. It's not foolproof, but and that's partly, if it was that easy, everyone would do it. I mean, we see clubs up, in the pyramid who have to change coaches, and again, look at it. Average length of a coach is just over a year, I think. So you can't say you can get, any club can't say they've got it perfect. But I think with Miron, we're thinking that we've got somebody both right for now and for some time for the future.
Yeah, okay. Someone who would have no doubt been involved in the process of appointing a new head coach would have been a director of football. Neil Jusnip was that man. He obviously is now no longer with the club. So are you able to tell us about, I suppose, why he is now no longer here and how that process worked without having that person, that, I suppose, football person as part of the process?
Well, I think first and foremost, I should say how incredible Neil Jusnip has been for the football club. So he came here when we'd been relegated 2019 season, we were just about to get in. And at that point, Brian and Shuey had come in, and I think he was invaluable support for them. I think if we look at things like how the academy was set up at that point of time, the style of football, right through the different age groups, all of those things, I think they weren't in a good place, and he was incredibly important in getting us from League Two to League One and the Championship, and obviously had a bit of a turn at doing the head coach role himself as well. So I think his dedication to the role, the journey that he's been part of, he's front and foremost in how that's progressed. I think, though, with where we get to is we got to the Championship. I think this season obviously has been, a struggle, let's face it. And I think what we felt was that we should review, once we'd made the decision around the head coach, what should we do with all the other positions? And it felt that it was a good opportunity to reset and really think about the future. We want to be a sustainable Championship club. We may have to go a step back to go forward, but that is still the ambition, to be able to do that. And we had to think about what is the best opportunity to do that. There's been lots of learnings along the way, and I think we're in different markets now, so we're trying to recruit in Europe more. We're being more data savvy in terms of how we do things. I think there's a future role for the academy which might be more commercialised. There's different things that require us to think in a different way, and so we thought the opportunity to kind of think about what our football structure is should be looked at that point. So it wasn't in any way difficult discussions. I think there was a realisation from both parties that perhaps the best thing for the individual, Neil, and for us was to think about things in a different way. So I think it was an opportunity that presented itself, and therefore one that we took and thought, right, let's get into a completely different sphere here.
So does that mean that role won't be filled in the same kind of capacity?
I think it's a great opportunity to look at the role and the structure. I think as the club has grown, I think the responsibilities perhaps that in that role as director of football, sporting director, or whatever we want to call it, I think when you're League Two and League One, I think particularly League Two, but League One, I think you can perhaps cover all of football. I think when you're wanting ambition, you've got to really think about where your focus and priorities are. So we know that recruitment is absolutely key. We know that the support around the first team is really key. We've got the good building blocks for the academy, but we need to think about how do we really commercialise that as well. So how do we get more Michael Coopers? How do we get more Adam Randalls? And that we have a pipeline to do that. And do we look at our strategy for getting both youngsters within the catchment, but also perhaps from further afield, that we invest in that in a different way. So I think that's a pure focus as opposed to perhaps overseeing the women's team, overseeing the style of play. I think we've got that kind of in place. I think we can really focus and hone down exactly what we need from that position. So it will be a different role, more technical probably, and more focused to get results ultimately on the pitch from the first team, but also be able to do that in a way where we're also making sure that we got the best benefits out of the academy.
Yeah. Okay. Backroom staff. You sort of mentioned it earlier. We've seen 2 new additions come in the past week to be part of Miron's team. I suppose it's taken a week for them to come in, and you mentioned with Wayne Rooney in the summer, no one else coming with him. Ian Foster, this time last year, was a similar sort of length of time, I suppose, before coaches came in. So again, just for concerns from people saying, do we look to add backroom staff at the same time as a coach? What would you say to that? And then why would it not be instant, I suppose, when that head coach is also...
Yeah, I mean, I think if you've got a head coach, first and foremost, it's them that's managing that, isn't it? They're managing that football side. And I think in the case of Ian, he was very clear he wanted to see what the setup was and make decisions, as he went along. He wanted to see who we had there, and then what gaps there might be. Now, I think if you're enforcing something on somebody and saying you must get somebody, that does cause, could cause a dynamic. That being said, as I mentioned before, I think if we were approaching in that situation, somebody said, I'm not bringing anybody, then we would go down a different route. So, I think in the case of Wayne, similar, but there was more of a structure. Latterly, obviously, Mike Phelan was brought in, but perhaps that was, again, responding to what the manager thought he needed. I think, again, let's learn from that in terms of what that case is. So obviously, this time round, one of the key things that we focused on is who are the backroom team, and what are their credentials, what would they bring, tell us about how they support you, all of those things. So we didn't want to be in a position where there were potential gaps. That's not to say, the previous managers were necessarily wrong in what they thought. It's just, I think, again, going back to what gives you the best chance of success. And obviously our learnings are that we needed to have that. So then to your question of a week. So first of all, we got to remember, again, comparing it, you've got people in working for other clubs. Those other clubs, like us, won't want to part company with them. There are conditions that need to be met in order for them to leave their club. So, there can be compensation, it can be notice periods, it can be all those sorts of things. And then there can be visas as well. So you also, a visa isn't just granted to everyone, as we know. You have to be able to show that you've got some of the technical expertise in certain areas, and that has to go through panels at the FA too. So, case in point is one of the backroom team had to do that very thing, where it had to go to a panel. All the information had to be submitted. It wasn't necessarily that he would do, but we had a 90% chance. But you've still got to do the process. So from start to finish, from the first conversations, are you interested? Would you like to do it? Talking about remuneration, all of those things. Again, really intense period. It's really very quick to get from A to B. You cannot do it unless you're taking everybody at the same time. And obviously, Miron was not at Circular. Hasn't been at Circular recently. It's a completely different kettle of fish to what it was. So I think everyone that was being involved should be commended for the time period that they've actually managed to get everything done. Because, if you think about the time from departure of the previous coach, getting another coach in, getting the backroom team in, I think from A to B has been pretty quick.
There have been 2 in. Will there be any more? Is there room for any more?
We would like to get some more, competencies, added benefits into data analysis. So we've got quite a lot around opposition analysis that we need to do. So we're still going to recruit for that position. We are recruiting for that position. So that's on the recruitment side, we're fine. But I think obviously the upskilling ourselves in terms of what we do for the future and match analysis and opposition analysis, I think is really important. So we're hopeful that we'll have somebody within a week or so for that position.
Another massive talking point at this time of year is obviously transfers, ins and outs. Now there's been some both ways obviously already. Again, how is that working at the moment without Neil, or without a director of football, I should say, in position? Because as you've said, that was one part of the remit before.
Yeah. So I think we all know, first of all, that January and everyone says it before the window, don't they? It's a really difficult window, and the reason it's a very difficult one, is it's a month, and as you'll see in the general market, I think there's not been that much activity at this stage. So you sometimes have to wait for a certain deal to be done for things to trickle down as well. So that can be from the Premier League down to then Championship, etc. So I think that's very similar pattern to what's happened in previous January windows. So I think bulk of everything will probably happen towards the end of the January transfer window. In terms of the process, Neil was one part of recruitment. So obviously we've got a head of recruitment in Jimmy, and we've got other dedicated people as well that solely focused on recruitment, and that team look at both from the type of player that we need, and particularly with Miron's style that he wants to get in play. We then support that with the finances, and I'm sure you'll come on to it, what finances we got, but the finances to do that, and we also need to balance that with both what we need now and also what we'll need for next season. So the process is an all-round process. The gap that Neil has left, as it were, in that position, so we're covering between us. I'm certainly doing a lot more myself on that, but it's a collaborative approach from the team. And I think most windows we've come out of it very well. Again, we do review processes of what we need to do and what not to do. What we've got to make sure, though, is that we also don't overpay for players, because that can be a very slippery slope if you start doing that. So I'm sure we'll have more in, and I'm sure we'll have more out. There will be that, and I can say that we're on that 24/7.
You preempted the question. Money. Where is there enough money to help improve the squad still this month? And where is that money? Well, I'll come on to that actually. Is there enough money at the moment?
Yeah, there is enough money. I mean, Simon, I think I said previously that money is available to strengthen the squad. That is available. That wholly goes to football, so it's not going off in other areas in this particular time. We've obviously sold players, so money can be reinvested. So there isn't a money issue in terms of being able to use that for this window. That being said, we need to use it wisely as well. So I think the wrong thing to do would be to say, well, I've got some cash here, I just need to spend it, and then overspend on that. So we've got to get the balance right between the two. So it is there. As with everything, we need to make sure it's being used properly and that we can demonstrate that any player that's coming in is going to be a better player than the one we've got, or that they bolster the squad both in the short term and the long term. Now, short term might be a loan, but longer term, we've got to think about, if it's a contract perspective, what they're going to be able to do in our journey.
Are you, having been more involved in it this month maybe than you would before, is Argyle an attractive destination to players?
I would say absolutely, generally yes. It's very well regarded as a place to come and play football. Players are given opportunity, and I think when we approach players, they always get the indication that they're going to be an important part of the squad. Philosophy of football, whichever head coach we've had, I think has been a key part in that, and I think we're an exciting proposition. I think this year is, and particularly at the moment, I think we've got to face into it. We're bottom of the league at the moment, so I think that message is one that has to be more powerful, because players sometimes have an opportunity for other clubs to go to, and that might be we might even pay more than the other club, but they may think, well, I want the chance of playing in Championship football, and am I going to get that? So I think it's definitely more nuanced this time in terms of how we have to approach it. But the overall message has to be that people want to come here and do want to play, and we get that combination right, where you can be sure that when they do come here, they will want to play, and that's the main thing.
Back to money then. Obviously, you mentioned Simon's, I suppose, injection, but there's been a lot of talk around investors and investment. So, again, are you able to provide any sort of update on that, and either how close we are, if it's there, what hold-ups might be, whatever, just any sort of update on potential investment?
I think, for everybody, I think it's probably taken longer than perhaps everyone had thought. It's taken longer than what we had thought too. So there is a long process, partly made up of nowadays when the clubs are either seeking investment or control, and we're effectively over time wanting to do both things. Then that needs lots of rigours around it. So there's things called the owners and directors tests that need to be undertaken. Simon at some point will not, I'm not saying immediately at all, I'm not saying on the horizon, but will want to relinquish control, but he'll want to do that in the best way for the club. So who will be the owners for the future, and continue that journey. So that requires a lot of discipline to make sure we get the right people in. We also need to think about funds and where those have been put to, both on the pitch but also in the infrastructure, and having the right kind of financiers who buy into that vision. We've looked at lots of different potential investor groups, and getting that combination, which I mentioned, gets you down a certain path, whereas a more limited number of investors. We've been in discussion for some time now with a group of investors. It's by no means certain that they will be the ones that will ultimately take over, and we have to keep our options open in that respect. I think it's difficult to put a timeline. What I would say, though, is that we're further down the journey than we've ever been, and that Simon, in the interim, and I'm not speaking for Simon because Simon has said this himself, will fund the necessary monies in order for us to be able to at least compete on the pitch. So in that immediate time, this window, and I'm sure we'll be sitting down in the summer to see what we need then, the discussions will continue. Doesn't mean that the plug will be pulled. It does mean that we need to carry on. We need to realise our vision, and all the board are bought into that. So I don't want to get into a trap of saying it's going to be next week or next month. I can say is we're nearer than we were, but we've got to be realistic that it's got to go through a process, and most of those things that people don't hear about for a long time do take a year or so to get to that point, and that's probably where we are now. We're not at a year since the first discussions took place, and you're talking about multi-million pounds and legacies and all sorts of things. So we've got to get it right.
We'll end on this, and it's to do with obviously league position and potential league that we are in next year. Firstly, does championship status affect investment? I.e., if we were to go down, would this group or other groups be less likely to want to invest in the club? Do you feel?
I don't. I mean, I think in the investors themselves, they'll very much have a model that they'll want to look at. So, sometimes investors only want to go into Premier League clubs because that's where it's at. Sometimes they'll want to go into Championship clubs because they see a pathway to the Premier League. But in other cases, investors see what is the long-term vision. Does that marry with what I want? And can we have an exciting pathway to do that? Can we be involved in that? So I think sometimes the type of investor might change, but there will definitely be the appetite to invest in a club like Argyle. And I think that at some point will come to fruition. Obviously, from an investment point of view, the price may change as well. That from the investor that they buy the club. But other than that, I do think that there'll be plenty of other suitors that could be out there.
And just finally, obviously, no one here wants it to happen. Relegation this year, but it could. So, what would it mean if we were to drop down a league? How would it affect the club as a whole?
Well, first of all, we want to absolutely avoid that. I think that's got to be reinforced. Miron came here to help us there and to make sure that we all do our very best not to get into that situation. But I think we've also got to face the position we're in. If you look at where the bookies are and everything else, then they would say that we're, plum favourites. We won't think like that, but I think we do have to have an eye on both scenarios. And certainly what I would say is if we do go through the trapdoor into League One, from a financial perspective, I think a lot of clubs that go from Championship to League One suddenly find that they might be in a very difficult position financially. We will not be in that situation. We'll be able to compete in a better way financially than when we were last time in League One. So we'll certainly have a top six budget there or thereabouts. So we'll be one of the, if you like, the big hitters in that, which was not the case when we first went into League One. And that's because we built up all the revenues over the last 5 years. So diversification of revenue is really important. Because we sell out all the time, we haven't got the ability, therefore, to necessarily grow that level of income. So, I think it's really important people also understand that all the work that's gone into, buying goals, which is now Harper's, the hospitality, the conferencing, etc., that has given us a platform to have a bigger budget in order to be able to compete. And if and when we're able to then expand the stadium and then have tickets in the future, more tickets in the future from a Championship or even further, then we'll have that added revenue. But for now, we'll be able to go back. If that unfortunately does happen, we'll have a strong budget to work to.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for answering the questions, Andrew.
Thank you.